I am 55 years old. I am sitting in a kitchen that smells like pine sol and old grease. My hands are cracked from a winter that wouldn't quit in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, where the gray sky feels like a lid screwed too tight on a jar. And my wedding ring, a thin, gold band that cost $200 in 1994, is starting to leave a green mark on my skin.
Before we begin this intriguing story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like this video, so you don't miss more powerful and emotional life stories like this one. Enjoy the story.
My name is Sarah. And for 30 years, I told myself I was the hero of a great American romance. The girl who chose the soul over the paycheck. The girl who said no to the high rise and yes to the fixer-upper. My husband, Leo, is in the driveway. I can hear the rattle of his 2012 Ford truck, a sound like a chest cold that never clears. It's the sound of a man who worked 30 years in a warehouse to put 2 kids through state college. It's the sound of good enough. But this morning, a courier came to the door. Not a mailman. A courier in a suit that cost more than my house, driving a car that whispered rather than roared. He handed me an envelope. Heavy paper. Black wax seal. Inside was a single plane ticket to New York City. First class. And a note written in a hand I haven't seen since the Clinton administration. The 30 years are up, Sarah. I kept my end of the bargain. Now come and see what it was actually for. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. Julian. The man who currently owns half the skyline I can see on the evening news. The man I left standing in the rain at a bus stop in Chicago because I told him he was too cold. I looked at the ticket. Then I looked at the pile of unpaid utility bills on the counter, weighted down by a chipped ceramic mug. Then I looked at the slow, tired way Leo was walking toward the front door, his shoulders hunched against the wind. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a victim of my own mythology. I remember 1995. The year the world felt like it was shifting under my feet. I was 24, living in a studio apartment in Lincoln Park where the heater clanked like a ghost in chains. I was working 3 jobs, waitressing, filing papers, and freelance editing. I was hungry, but I was beautiful in that sharp, hungry way that draws predators and poets alike. And I had 2 men who wanted to own my future. Julian was the golden boy of the Gold Coast. His father owned the shipping lines, the steel mills, the very air people breathed. Julian didn't have a heart, he had a business plan. He looked at me and didn't see a girl. He saw an asset to be acquired. Sarah, he told me once, sitting in the back of a town car that smelled of leather and expensive tobacco. Love is a chemical reaction that lasts 18 months. It's a trick of biology to ensure the species continues. Legacy, however, is forever. Stay with me, and your grandchildren will never know the meaning of the word debt. They will be the ones who write the history, not the ones who read it. He was 26 and already spoke like an emperor. He was brilliant. He was terrifying. He was a cage made of 24-karat gold. And then there was Leo. Leo was the guy who played guitar at the bar where I waitressed the late shift. He had holes in his jeans and a laugh that made the cheap beer taste like craft ale. He didn't talk about legacies. He talked about the way the light hit the lake in July, turning the water into molten silver. He didn't have a business plan. He had a poem he wrote on the back of a napkin while I was clearing tables. One night, Julian took me to the top of the Hancock building. The city was a grid of diamonds below us, cold and distant. He opened a box. The diamond inside was so large it looked vulgar, like a glass eye staring back at me. "Marry me," he said. "We move to London in a month. I'm taking over the European branch. You'll have a staff. You'll have a life people write books about. You will never have to scrub a floor or worry about a winter coat again." I looked at the diamond. Then I thought about Leo. I thought about the way Leo shared his last $5 with me when my car broke down. I thought about the way Leo looked at me like I was the only person on earth, not a trophy to be displayed. I told Julian no. I told him he was hollow. I told him that money couldn't buy the way Leo made me feel when we danced in his kitchen to the radio. Julian didn't cry. He didn't beg. He just stood there, looking out at the city he would soon rule. "You're a romantic, Sarah," he said quietly, his voice devoid of emotion. "But romantics always forget that the bills eventually come due. I hope your real life is everything you imagine it to be." I walked out. I went straight to Leo's cramped apartment. I told him I chose him. I chose the struggle. I chose the truth. He cried. He held me. He promised me we would build something real. And we did. We built a life of almost. Leo walked into the kitchen now, 30 years later. He saw the envelope on the table. He saw the ticket. I expected him to be angry. I expected him to ask who sent it, to defend our simple life. But he didn't. He just stood by the sink, his back to me, staring at a stain on the wall. "Is it from him?" Leo asked. His voice was different. It wasn't the tired, gravelly voice of my husband, the man who complained about his back and the price of milk. It was sharp. Steady. Professional. "How do you know about Julian?" I asked. I'd never mentioned his name. Not once in 30 years. I had buried that part of my life like a shameful secret. Leo turned around. He wasn't looking at me with love. He was looking at me with a strange, clinical detachment, like a scientist observing a specimen that had finally reacted to a stimulus. "Julian and I had a deal, Sarah," he said. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt too thick to breathe. "What deal?" Leo sat down at the table. The same table where we'd celebrated birthdays with supermarket cakes and cried over layoffs. In 1995, Julian knew he was going to be the most powerful man in the country. But he had a problem. He knew he was a monster. He knew he would destroy anything he loved because he only knew how to conquer. Leo leaned forward, resting his calloused hands on the table. "He loved you, Sarah. In his own sick, transactional way. He didn't want to break you. But he couldn't let anyone else have you for free." My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. "So he found me," Leo continued. "The starving artist. The guy with nothing to lose and a talent for performing." Leo reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. An expensive, sleek black model. Not the cracked screen, 3-year-old phone I thought he owned. "He paid me, Sarah." I shook my head, a frantic, desperate denial. "No. That's not possible. We've been poor our whole lives. You've worked at that warehouse for pennies." "I don't work at a warehouse," Leo interrupted. "I haven't worked in a warehouse since the Twin Towers were standing." "Then where have you been every day for 30 years? I screamed. Leo sighed, a sound of profound boredom. "The office. Managing the trust. The warehouse is a shell company. My co-workers were security detail. My boss was Julian's personal attorney." The room started to spin. The peeling wallpaper, the leaky faucet, the hum of the old refrigerator, it was all dissolving. "The struggle?" I whispered. "The years we couldn't afford the car repairs? The year we almost lost the house in 2008? All scripted," Leo said. "Julian wanted you to feel the weight of your choice. He wanted you to believe that your love was stronger than poverty. It was an experiment. He wanted to see how long a romantic could last before she broke. He paid me $500,000 a year to be the perfect, struggling husband. To give you the simple life you said you wanted." I felt a coldness spread through my veins, a frost that started at my heart and moved to my fingertips. "You sold our life?" I asked. "You sold my children's childhoods?" "The children are fine, Sarah," Leo said, his voice cold. "Their tuition wasn't paid by loans. Their bank accounts are overflowing. They've known since they were 18. Julian insisted on that. He didn't want them to grow up to be romantics like you. My children knew. My daughter, who hugged me when I cried over the heating bill. My son, who worked a summer job to help out. They were actors. Everyone was an actor. The contract is up today, Leo said, standing up. 30 years. That was the term. He's waiting for you in New York. He wants to know if he won. He wants to know if you still think money can't buy the way I made you feel. Leo walked to the door. He didn't look back. I'm moving to the villa in Cabo tomorrow. The papers are on the counter. You get the house. And the memories. If you still want them. He walked out. The Ford truck in the driveway didn't rattle when he started it. He must have turned off the sound system that mimicked the engine trouble. The truck roared with the power of a high-end sports car as he sped away. I sat there in the silence. The hero of the story. Alone in a house built of lies. The flight to New York was a nightmare of velvet and crystal. I sat in 1A, a seat that cost more than my first 3 cars combined. The flight attendant offered me vintage champagne in a glass so thin it felt like it would melt in my hand. I looked at my reflection in the dark cabin window. The woman staring back had middle-class struggle etched into the fine lines around her eyes and the weary slump of her shoulders. She was a masterpiece of Julian's design. He hadn't just bought Leo, he had bought my suffering. Every time I cried because we couldn't afford the good health insurance, he was there, watching through a bank statement. Every time I told my daughter she couldn't have the designer prom dress and we spent a Saturday sewing a knockoff from a pattern, he was there, nodding at the authenticity of our poverty. He had turned my motherhood into a low-budget indie film for his own amusement. When the car pulled up to the St. Regis, the doorman didn't see a tired housewife from Ohio. He saw a ghost. "Welcome back, Mrs. Vance," he said, bowing slightly. I froze on the sidewalk, the humid New York air hitting me like a slap. "I'm not Mrs. Vance. I'm Sarah Miller." He smiled, a tight, professional mask that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Vance has been expecting you for 30 years, ma'am. To us, you've always been the mistress of the house. We have kept your favorite lilies in the lobby every Tuesday, just in case." The elevator ride to Penthouse B felt like a descent into a deep, pressurized trench. My ears popped. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The doors opened directly into a living room that defied gravity. Floor-to-ceiling glass. The Empire State Building looked like a toy on a shelf, glowing with a cold, electric ambition. And there he was. Julian didn't look like a man of 56 who had spent 30 years building an empire. He looked like a man who had conquered time itself. He was standing by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, wearing a suit that looked like it was woven from shadows. He didn't turn around when I entered. "The blue silk dress suits you, Sarah," he said. His voice was like velvet over gravel, exactly as I remembered it, but heavier with the weight of absolute authority. "Though I see Leo didn't tell you to update your jewelry. That gold band is looking tarnished." I walked to the center of the room. The rug beneath my feet cost more than the college tuition I had spent a decade worrying about. "He told me everything, Julian. He told me about the contract. He told me about the Sarah Trust." Julian turned then. His eyes were cold, twin chips of blue ice, but there was a flicker of something, triumph? Hunger? "Everything is a large word, Sarah. Did he tell you about the 2008 crash? When the warehouse almost went under and you spent 3 nights praying on the kitchen floor because you thought we were going to be homeless?" I felt a surge of bile in my throat. "I remember." Julian laughed. It was a hollow, metallic sound that echoed off the glass walls. "I didn't just pay him to stay. I paid him to be better than me. I wanted to see if good old Leo could maintain the illusion of a saint while taking a monster's money. It turns out, everyone has a price. His was just surprisingly reasonable." He actually asked for a performance bonus after your 10th anniversary. I stepped closer, my voice trembling with a rage I hadn't known I possessed. Why? Why ruin my life? I loved you once, in my own way. Why turn 30 years into a sick social experiment? Why let me suffer for nothing? Julian set his glass down on a marble table. He walked toward me, and for a second, I saw the 26-year-old boy I'd left at the bus stop. The boy who had been told he could have everything, except the one girl who saw through his hollow chest. Because you called me hollow, Sarah. You told me that my world was fake and that Leo's world was real. You told me that money couldn't buy the truth of a simple life. He stopped inches from me. I could smell his cologne, sandalwood and cold rain. I simply wanted to prove to you that reality is whatever the man with the checkbook says it is. He reached out and touched my cheek. His hand was cold, devoid of the warmth I had spent 30 years convincing myself I didn't need. You lived a real life because I funded the theater. You felt real love because I bought the actor. You were never a hero, Sarah. You were a tenant in a dream I owned. You suffered because I wanted to see if suffering made your love purer. It didn't. It just made you tired. I pulled away, my skin crawling. I'm leaving. I'm going to find my children. I'm going to tell them their father is a fraud and that you are a psychopath. Julian's smile didn't fade. It widened, becoming something shark-like. Your children? You mean the two young adults whose trust funds are tied to a very specific, very legal non-disclosure agreement? The ones who already know everything? The floor felt like it was disappearing. What? Leo didn't just take the money for himself, Sarah. He's a good man, remember? He wanted his children to have the world. He told them the truth when they turned 18. He told them it was a family secret to protect Mom's delicate sensibilities. To keep her happy in her little bubble of nobility. I felt a physical nausea. My children. My babies. They had looked at me across the dinner table for years, watching me clip coupons, watching me fret over the grocery bill, watching me wear the same winter coat for 6 seasons. And they knew. They were in on it. The whole world was a glass box, and I was the only one who didn't know I was the exhibit. So, Julian said, walking back to the bar with a predatory grace. The experiment is over. The contract is dead. You can go back to Ohio, live in that house, which is yours, by the way, and live out your days as a widow of a marriage that never existed. You can be the noble woman who was cheated by fate. He paused, holding up a second glass. Or, you can admit that the romantic Sarah died a long time ago. And you can finally take the seat I reserved for you 30 years ago. I looked at the glass. I looked at the city below, the millions of people scuttling like ants, all of them chasing a reality that could be bought and sold. I thought about the real life waiting for me in Ohio. The pitying looks from neighbors. The children who would call me brave while spending the money Julian gave them for lying to me. The husband who was probably already moving into a condo in Cabo with Julian's final bonus. I realized then that there was no Sarah left to save. She had been evaporated by the lie. I walked over to the bar. My hand was steady as I took the glass. Tell me, Julian, I said, looking him dead in the eye. How much is the signing bonus for the next 30 years? And does it include the cost of a private investigator to find where Leo is hiding in Mexico? Julian's eyes ignited with a dark, terrifying satisfaction. He had won. But as I sipped the scotch, the most expensive thing I had ever tasted, I realized something he hadn't. If I was an asset, it was time to start liquidating the company from the inside. Julian's penthouse was silent, save for the hum of the city 80 stories below. He looked at me with the smug satisfaction of a collector who had finally recovered a lost painting. To him, I was back in the frame. I like this version of you, Sarah, he whispered, leaning against the mahogany bar. The pragmatist. The woman who finally stopped pretending that a poem on a napkin can pay for a hip replacement. I took another sip of the scotch. It burned, but it was a clean, honest burn. I'm not a pragmatist, Julian. I'm a creditor. And I've come to collect 30 years of back interest. He chuckled, reaching for his checkbook, a physical relic he kept for moments like this. Name your price. A townhouse in the West Village? A villa in Tuscany? A wardrobe that doesn't smell like detergent? I want Leo, I said. The name felt like a piece of broken glass in my mouth. Julian paused, his pen hovering over the paper. Leo? He's gone, Sarah. That was the agreement. Once the 30 years were up, he was to vanish. He's probably halfway to Cabo by now, sipping a margarita on my dime. I don't want his location, Julian. I want his liquidation. I set the glass down on the marble counter with a sharp clack. You spent 30 years watching me struggle. You enjoyed the authenticity of my poverty. Now, I want to watch him lose the only thing he actually loves. Not me. Not the kids. The money. Julian's eyes narrowed. This wasn't the script he had written. The trust is ironclad, Sarah. I'm a man of my word. A contract is a contract. Then find a loophole, I snapped. You're Julian Vance. You don't follow laws, you buy the people who write them. If you want me to sit at your table, if you want me to be the Mrs. Vance the doorman thinks I am, then I want to see Leo Miller back in a pair of jeans with holes in them. And this time, I want the holes to be real. Julian stared at me for a long time. The silence stretched, heavy and dangerous. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face, not the shark-like grin from before, but something almost like respect. You've spent too much time around me, after all, he murmured. Very well. If that's the price of your loyalty, I'll have my lawyers begin the clawback process. We'll find a breach. We always do. The next 6 months were a blur of transformation. Julian moved me into a suite at the Pierre while our new home was being renovated. I traded my CVS moisturizer for creams that cost $500 an ounce. I traded my sensible Ohio bob for a sleek, silver-toned cut that made me look like an ice queen. But while the world saw a woman finally embracing her rightful place, I was busy. I spent my mornings in the back of Julian's town cars, but I wasn't going to Bergdorf's. I was meeting with the private investigator Julian had hired for me. His name was Miller, ironically, a retired NYPD detective who didn't ask questions as long as the wires cleared. He's in Tulum, Miller told me, sliding a folder across the table at a dingy diner in Queens, the only place I felt I could breathe. Living under the name Leo Rossi. He bought a boutique hotel. High-end. Cash deal. I looked at the photos. Leo looked younger. The stress of the warehouse job had vanished. He was tanned, smiling at a woman half his age near a turquoise pool. The same smile he used to give me when I brought him a cold beer after a long shift. And the kids? I asked. The daughter is in Paris. The son is in Singapore. They're living like royalty, Sarah. They don't seem to miss the simple life much. My heart didn't break. It had already been shattered into so many pieces that it was now just a pile of sharp, jagged dust. Start the short sell on the hotel, I told Miller. And the daughter's gallery in Paris? I want the lease pulled. Julian has connections with the holding company. You're going after the kids too? Miller asked, raising an eyebrow. They had a choice at 18, I said, my voice as cold as the New York winter outside. They chose to watch their mother drown so they could have a bigger boat. Now, I'm taking the boat. The confrontation didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in Tulum, 1 year to the day after I walked out of that kitchen in Ohio. Leo was standing on the deck of his hotel, watching the sunset. He looked peaceful. Until he saw me walking up the sand. I wasn't wearing flannel. I was wearing a white linen suit that cost $3,000. My hair was perfect. My eyes were empty. Sarah, he whispered, the cigar nearly falling from his lips. What are you doing here? Julian said. Julian says a lot of things, Leo. But I'm the one who signs the checks for the legal department now. I walked up the stairs, my heels clicking on the expensive teakwood he had bought with my life. The bank called this morning, didn't they? Leo's face went pale. The tan suddenly looked like a sickly mask. The audit? How do you know about that? It wasn't an audit, Leo. It was an acquisition. I bought the debt on this hotel 3 weeks ago. And since you breached your contract with Vance Holdings by talking to a journalist in Cancun last month, the Sarah Trust has been voided. I didn't talk to anyone, he shouted, stepping toward me. I was careful. You were greedy, I said softly. You wanted to brag about how you played the great Julian Vance. You told that girl at the bar. She was one of my interns, Leo. Julian didn't even have to try. I leaned in, smelling the expensive rum on his breath. You're broke, Leo. The car, the hotel, the offshore accounts, they're all being frozen as we speak. Our daughter is being evicted from her gallery tonight. Our son? He's losing his vice presidency in Singapore. Leo looked like he was about to collapse. Sarah, please, we're family. No, I said, stepping back. We were a project. And the project is cancelled. I turned to walk away, the salt air blowing through my expensive hair. Wait, he yelled. You're just like him. You're just like Julian. You're hollow. I stopped. I didn't turn around. You're right, Leo, I said to the ocean. But at least now, the view is better. I flew back to New York that night. Julian was waiting for me in the penthouse, a celebratory dinner laid out on the table. He looked at me with a possessive pride. He's done, Julian said, raising a glass. The accounts are settled. You have your pound of flesh, Sarah. Are you satisfied? I looked at Julian. The man who had orchestrated 30 years of my misery. The man who thought he had finally bought my soul. Almost, I said. I walked over to the desk and picked up a pen. There's just one more contract we need to discuss, Julian. Oh. And what's that? The one where you stepped down as CEO of Vance Holdings, I said, sliding a document across the desk. And I take over. Julian stared at me. Then he burst out laughing. Sarah, don't be ridiculous. I gave you a seat at the table. I didn't give you the keys to the kingdom. Check your personal server, Julian, I said, sitting down in his leather chair. The one you used to watch the hidden cameras in our house in Ohio for 30 years. Julian's laughter died instantly. I found the recordings, Julian. Every single one. 30 years of you watching a woman sleep, cry, and live without her consent. It's not just a scandal. It's a multi-state felony. Kidnapping, surveillance, wiretapping, the list is quite long. I leaned forward, the light of the city reflecting in my cold, gray eyes. You wanted to see if money could buy a real life, Julian? I'm going to show you what it can buy when the romantic finally learns how to trade. Julian looked at the document. He looked at me. For the first time in his life, he looked small. You wouldn't, he whispered. It would destroy you too. The world would know your whole life was a lie. Julian, I said, a small, genuine smile finally touching my lips. I've been living a lie for 30 years. I'm an expert. But you? You've never lived a day in a world where you weren't the boss. I pushed the pen toward him. Sign. Or I call the New York Times. And I think they'd love a story about the billionaire who bought a husband to watch a housewife. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. Julian's hand was shaking as he gripped the fountain pen. It was the first time in 30 years I had seen him lose his composure. He wasn't the architect anymore, he was the demolition site. You're a monster, Sarah, he whispered, the ink finally hitting the paper. No, Julian, I said, watching the black lines of his signature seal his fate. I'm just a quick learner. You spent 3 decades as my teacher. Did you really think I wouldn't pass the final exam? I took the document from his hand. The weight of it felt like nothing. Vance Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar empire, was now under the control of a woman who, 24 hours ago, was worried about the price of eggs in Ohio. Get out, I said. Julian looked at the sprawling view of the city he had built. This is my home. This is an asset, I corrected him. And as of 10 seconds ago, you've been evicted. I'll have your things sent to the hotel. A mid-range one. I think you'd find the authenticity of a 3-star lobby quite refreshing. He stood up, his regal posture crumbling. He walked to the elevator without a word. As the doors closed, I saw his reflection, a tired old man who had traded everything for a game he eventually lost. I was alone. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at New York. I felt a surge of power, a cold electricity that made my skin tingle. But underneath it, there was a hollow ache. The first year of my reign was a bloodbath. I didn't lead with a velvet glove. I led with a scalpel. I liquidated the shell companies. I fired the lawyers who had drafted the Sarah Trust. I cleaned out the board of directors. The business world called me the Ice Queen of Wall Street. They thought I was a genius. They didn't know I was just fueled by a 30-year reservoir of spite. But then came the phone call I couldn't ignore. It was from a hospital in Paris. My daughter, Chloe. She had been found in a small apartment, the kind of place I used to live in back in Chicago. Empty wine bottles. Unpaid bills. A desperate attempt to survive without the Julian-funded safety net I had ripped away. I flew to Paris on a private jet. When I walked into her room, she looked at me with eyes that were terrifyingly familiar. They were my eyes from 1995. Hungry. Desperate. Mom, she whispered. I'm here, Chloe. Why did you do it? She asked, her voice cracking. I know we lied. I know Dad was what he was. But we were just kids. We didn't know how to say no to that kind of money. I sat on the edge of the bed. My $3,000 coat felt heavy. You had a choice at 18, Chloe. You could have told me. You could have saved me from the lie. And go back to being poor, she snapped, a spark of the Vance greed flickering in her eyes. You don't understand, Mom. Once you've tasted that life, you can't go back to clipping coupons. We thought we were keeping you happy. We thought the lie was a gift. The lie was a prison, I said. And you were the guards. I left a check on the nightstand. It was for $1 million. This is the last thing you get from me, I told her. Use it to build a real life. Or drown in it. The choice is finally yours. I walked out without looking back. 6 months later, I received a letter. It wasn't a heavy envelope with a wax seal. It was a crumpled piece of notebook paper. It was from Leo. I'm back in Ohio, Sarah. Not in our house. I'm in a trailer park 3 miles from the warehouse where I used to work. I'm actually working now. For real this time. Cleaning floors at a high school. My back hurts. My hands are cracked. And for the first time in 30 years. I'm not acting. I wonder if you can say the same. I stared at the letter for an hour. I looked around my office, the marble, the gold, the assistants waiting for my command. I went to the drawer of my desk and pulled out a small, tattered object. A napkin. The poem Leo had written for me in 1994. The one that had convinced me to walk away from a billionaire. The light on the lake is a silver thread, linking the living to the words unsaid. I realized then the ultimate cruelty of Julian's plan. He hadn't just faked the poverty. He had faked the soul. Leo had never been a poet. He had been a mediocre actor with a high-priced script. The light on the lake wasn't a romantic observation. it was a line Julian had probably suggested over a steak dinner in a secret meeting. I took a lighter from the desk. I held the flame to the corner of the napkin. I watched the silver thread turn to black ash. I had won the war. I had the money. I had the power. I had the revenge. But as I sat in the darkened penthouse, 80 stories above the world, I realized that I had become the very thing I refused to be at 24. I was hollow. Julian hadn't just proven that money could buy reality. He had proven that if you live a lie long enough, the truth doesn't set you free. It just leaves you with nothing left to believe in. I walked to the window and touched the glass. Somewhere out there, a 24-year-old girl was falling in love with a boy who had nothing. I hoped for her sake that he was telling the truth. But as I looked at my own reflection, cold, sharp, and glittering with diamonds, I knew better. In this world, the only thing more expensive than a lie is the truth you find too late to use. I am 57 years old. I am the richest woman in New York. And I would give every cent I own to go back to that bus stop in the rain, and keep walking until I reached a city where neither of them knew my name. But the bus doesn't run that way anymore.